gibt's kein Heiratsbüro. Holla die Redel, die holla die ho. Ab Uhr findet Dirndl jetzt so oder so. Holla die Redel, die ho.
I'm the first artist in the world who used since '58 television sets and pictures, and I have worked with television deformations, and I feel that now if you find 250 television sets in this building, it's really a dictionary. The Documenta is a dictionary of the art inventions.
What about the image you use on the television screen of a classical building and a jet fighter?
Yeah, you know, my idea was to put the jet fighter on this building. We had the financial problem solved and the technical problem all right, but the Documenta society came with a pretext that it could be too dangerous, it is difficult to tie up, it could fall down. So we find it was a kind of censorship not to allow me to put the starfighter on a roof. This room was always conceived as the fact what the airplane, what is the result of the doing of an airplane, no? When an airplane does not sit quietly on the roof, when it is in action, it produces all this. It is not an illustration, a direct illustration. It is an indirect illustration. It's a sociology around you, and I just don't want to put the horrible image in a comfortable context. I want you at least to derange, to have this negative information during you see this negative information of our world.
The images with the television screens are only accessible by wading through water. What is the point of having the water in the way you have?
Yeah, it's a chaos situation, naturally. I want to produce an equivalent to the chaos in the information you see. And I want that you feel not comfortable when you see the negative information of the disaster. That means all the world today is sitting with whiskey glasses and beer glasses in front of the television set and seeing disasters and war and nature catastrophes in the television set. But in art I have a chance to do another comment on this imagery. Going to have honeybees in there, living honeybees. So they are flying out, and I put the camera on the honeybees. So I'm comparing the bee with the airplane.
I see.
Or the life of the bee with the life of humanity, no? And putting the question why the nature objects are mostly positive, and why all the objects made, all the phenomena made by mankind are positive and negative. No? An airplane is something practical, positive, but at the same time it produces all the destruction.
So you're going to...
But an animal does not produce destruction.
And you're going to...
Only positive.
Put the bees in here tomorrow, are you?
Yes, and this there's a cave, a case. And they fly out and they come in. It's installed by the museum here of natural history in Kassel. They're installing the bees.
My name
And then,
Albrecht D. Point. As you know the joke of the famous historian painter Dürer. Everybody knows this man. But this is my real name. My name is Albrecht Dietrich. And Dietrich and Albrecht, it's the same in thanks, and it's the same in Germany. Same for family name and for forename. And so it's a problem. And then one day I have closed this, and so only the D as a difference to other people. Okay, and then 5 years ago I have started to Documenta 5, a project as the alternative to Documenta 6. As Seaman has informed me that after I was silent for 1 year, no information to him, he has no area for me in Documenta 5 for information about art in context to society. He has written to me, nothing, no place here for a political box or political corner. And then I've written, it's okay, best for your letter, and here, best wishes, Documenta 6, reflection by Albrecht D. And after this, I have started a program for Documenta 6. So everybody asks me what you are doing to Documenta 6, and I say, yes, I will start a program for Documenta 6, not art at the wall. It's better to have the communication of art in the society, especially in the Western countries, including America, Japan, and Western Europe. And so I have started this project here in the Documenta 6, Documenta 5 area. I've got a videotape in the videotape, and there I've informed about all the lines in the program. And there's a part of it, it's commercial background, and then the museums and the alternative projects by artists. You know, there are a lot of artists who are distributing art too. It's not a big difference between artist and a man who runs a gallery. I'm seeing me more as a performer, but not in this direction like the today's performance in the traditional line of Dada, Neo-Dada, Fluxus, Post-Fluxus, and now this younger generation of performers. But they are coming direct, and often they're reproducing old structures. I'm a performer as somebody who lives his doings. I'm not an artist in traditional sense. I'm a gallerist. I'm an editor, as with a reflection brush. I'm a printer. Often I'm working at the print shop with this book. I have printed it by my own as weekend, Sundays and third. And I'm doing all things by my own. And I'm an artist too, with visual work, with photocopy. I was one of the first 69 and started with photocopy in artwork, and a lot of possibilities of the photocopycal technique. Like today, colored Xerox. Often I'm going to England to do it there, so it's cheap in England. And that's my problem today, not to be the traditional artist, but not to be a traditional editor or a traditional gallerist. And I'm doing always the things as performing, you know. And there's no line between my life, my work for money. I'm working at a grammar school, educating children, and for art, crafts, and photography. And so always it's the same. I have there the thing with the art history from the work at school, and on the other side I have my own art, and then I have the function of a communicator of art too. And but always it's changing, it's mixed, like mixed media totally. And so often the people say, yes, I'm the artwork as the people of the art history who are in the time of the 12th century to the 16th century. There, you know, there was an artist, not only a painter, he worked in the town council too. or he was a craftsman too. There was no split between all these things. And in this tradition, yes, so I'm a traditionalist too. I'm working in that tradition. And
So your art becomes integrated into your general...
yes, in all my life, yes. But now back to this Documenta 6 project of communication of art. And after I have started it here with this video tape, I've got the first information by people who are interested from the scene, artists and other people, and private as collectors and so on too. And then I have presented this program at the Kunstverein Hannover, then in Holland, in Amsterdam, and then in London Art into Society exhibition. And there a lot of people have started to give me, to backing me in that project. And this was Gustav Metzger in London, Colin Naylor, Norman Rosenthal and Richard DeMarco. And you see, I'm more engaged in England with my project than here in Germany. From Germany I have only this man from the Happening in Fluxus Archives film, and a Greek man, Joachimides, who has organized Article Society. And as other, I have a man who has no state contact. He is stateless. So he was collaborating with the Germans in the Second World War in Belgium, and now he is kicked out. This is the other. And so you see, it's a crazy background of such a project. But the official people, I have invited Mr. Schneckenburger too, to write something for this project. No reply, silence. And there are a lot of funny events too. But it was so crazy. This man who runs this Documenta, Schneckenburger, he has written to Joachimides a letter. Then if he has the possibility to do the Documenta alone, he wants to do our work like Art into Society, context to society, to engaged art. He wants to do it in the middle of such an exhibition, but now they have the problem to run this Documenta under the motto of medium, as the artist and the medium, and the media, as McLuhan's old bullshit sentence, the medium is the message, and this is early 60s, and I think today it's really pursed. And 77, 20 years later, or 15 years later, post McLuhan. I don't know what your opinion and your experience about McLuhan is, I don't know it. But my experience is that this is really the snow of yesterday. At its first, it's good for the early 60s. But today, to run an exhibition like this here, in that case of the media as the motto of that exhibition, it's a little bit too crazy.
Пакистан. В Пакистане произошли волнения, демонстрации против действий правительства. Демонстрации были весьма активными, произошли столкновения с полицией, в которых были ранены и даже убиты многие демонстранты.
May God help us to be courteous people.
Today on Faith and Life, we have heard from the Reverend Sanford Carter, pastor, Christ Episcopal Church, Washington, D.C. Faith and Life, pre-recorded, is offered in cooperation with the Council of Churches of Greater Washington, the Jewish Community Council, and the Catholic...
Meine Damen und Herren, das Programm des deutschen Fernsehens beendet. Hier noch ein Blick auf die Uhr. Es ist 23 Uhr und 26 Minuten. 23 Uhr 26. Hinweis auf das Programm.
на завтра. 9:30. Цветное телевидение для школьников. На приз клуба «Кожаный мяч». 10:00. Интервидение. Рассказы о русских художниках. Брюлов. RCTV program schedules are listed in the Washington Star, the Washington Post, the Alexandria Gazette, TV Guide magazine, and the Northern Virginia Sun. For the best in television, WRC-TV, Channel 4. The NBC television studios at 4001 Nebraska Avenue Northwest. For the National Broadcasting Company in Washington, this is Mac McGarry wishing you good night. Now our national anthem. Животных. 18:15. Дети страны Советов. Премьера телефильма.
Is this a new piece that you're presenting?
No, it's actually the old piece. This piece is obviously set up for this show, but I mean the idea is old, because there are similar pieces. And it's like this could be a masterpiece, and this could be a reason for books to be written, and this could be a worth of $1 million of something pounds or whatever.
In fact, just looking at the photographs, which are displayed on a sort of semicircular wall overlooking a staircase, the locations you've chosen would normally have absolutely no significance beyond their kind of functional role, but you've presumably seen them as a possible location to have significance.
Yeah.
You know, like the corner of a kitchen or a telephone kiosk or a bit of a corridor.
Yes, I mean, I was trying to find, I mean, obviously in this piece the photography, as the photography is obviously not important for me, and most of these photographs, they would be completely meaningless without this frame, logic frame. And I mean, nowadays, more or less in the end of 20th century, it's obvious that everything could be beautiful, but I'm not so sure if everything could be meaningful as well. So I was trying just to get any kind of photograph which obviously is must have certain kind of meaning and signification. And I mean, in this work I was just simply attributing the meaning, and so actually it deals with the many kind of personal interpretations, because kitchen corner could have different meaning for two different people, and the same is with the gallery space or the, I mean, street space or facade or any location, in fact. And I think that actually it could help of making some kind of personal history, because I don't think that, or I myself don't believe in this kind of general history, because I think everyone should create his own history. And recently I kind of wrote, how could I believe in history when I can even read my own handwriting one day later? And so in a way, I mean, then how could I believe in something which was written by somebody else like 100 years ago? And so, I mean, this particular piece, which is here on the show, is pointing out existence of these different logics and different histories.
I'm interested to know, first of all, how you as members of the APG relate both to Documenta and to the Free University, which you're participating in.
The Documenta organization sent me a letter saying, would I subscribe to its book section? And on the basis of what they'd seen before, I sent in an agreement, and it became obvious that I was going to want to introduce some material which was not specifically to do with books, and I suggested to APG. Well, finally, it seemed that the arrangement was going to work if the Free University took the APG part of it.
APG at Documenta, especially in relationship to the Free University, who are acting as agency, I suppose, to allow all the multidisciplinary activities to have a voice. What we've actually done as the APG, which is basically individual and organization, is something that we felt that we could actually propose to Castle City, so that Documenta is in a way housing the objects and the activities of art as known about and seen, and we would be proposing to the city that they should have something which they don't know about but would come out of them taking on an artist or group of artists to work with the city, which might be the subject of a Documenta of the future. Perhaps Ian's got more to say about that.
Yeah, the proposal is that an alternative to commissioning massive monuments which are presented at a festive occasion, and because the thinking behind that, no matter what the quality of the finished work, the thinking behind it, the commissioning of it is still basically that of asking the artist to paint a mural or make some artwork which stays in place for a short period of time and then is taken away again. We would propose that away from all the glare of publicity in the intervening years between Documenta, the present Documenta and the next one, the civic authorities in Castle should have an artist working in one of their departments, or maybe more artists working in several departments, not to make monuments, but to work in some way which couldn't be foreseen, the direction that it would take. Quite a different approach, and it'd be interesting to see what their reaction would be.
APG seems to be, or has in fact, developed a model of art practice where the artist is totally integrated within some sort of social context or work context, and what we see at Documenta is a long way away from that and rooted in a very kind of traditional notion of, as you were saying, in displaying works. I mean, could you envisage the situation, or would you prefer the situation where this wasn't set up in the same way? Say, for instance, if your artist working in the Castle office maybe would instigate a whole series of placements instead of putting on something like this again.
That's an interesting idea. In fact, it was one of the things that John Latham had in mind when he worked with the Scottish office through an APG placement, to actually use the placement to create a whole batch of placements. That could well work here. I was not saying that it's an either-or situation. I mean, I've been around about 2/3 of Documenta, and some of the work in there definitely interests me. I'm intrigued by this this question of the governing body financing the artist. It seems if the artist says what he's going to do, if he proposes a project and that project is acceptable, it doesn't matter how much money is spent, providing he actually completes it. He can drill a hole a mile deep using a giant oil rig, providing he carries that out, everybody's happy. Never mind what the end result of it might be and whether people like it or don't like it or whatever. But what we are proposing is to say that's not enough. The artist shouldn't be outside on the lawn. He should be inside. And you take on an artist as a decision maker within your civic administration on the same level as the civil servants, obviously within a specialised area. Some preliminary research would have to be done, a feasibility study, to find out what the most suitable area for an artist to work in would be. But it might be public health, it might be I don't know what it might be. It might be any area. APG's had placements during 1975-76 in the Department of the Environment, the Department of Health, the Scottish Office. Also dealt with British Rail, large industrial firms, so the range is very wide.
Your involvement in the Free University is that I understand you're going to propose and talk about the placements in a very practical way that you've been involved in. I mean, could you describe some of the things you're actually going to talk about on Sunday?
Well, we've got a rather formal agenda, because we want it rather formally described. In fact, John will describe that to you, but we will be describing the actual placement within the Department of the Environment, how it came about, what we had to go through to get it to happen, because we don't just sort of ring up and say, will you have us? It takes 2 years to negotiate. The very first government department placement came as a result of getting a memorandum through the Civil Service Department when our grant from the Arts Council was withdrawn. And it was the artists sitting down with the Civil Service Department and them working out with the artists how a brief that we don't like the phrase now, it was pointed up to us, a host organisation would agree to, a brief where they didn't know what they were going to get and how possible that was to negotiate, that made the breakthrough into the other government departments. But it was the original memorandum that we got through in 1972 that made it possible for us to carry that piece of paper and talk through the feasibility of our proposals of some organisation taking on something from which they wouldn't know what they were going to get, but made it possible for us to go through. But each thing had to be carried and talked through one by one, and then again with the people inside. And we'll be talking about that sort of aspect of it, as well as how the artists found themselves when they were actually working within organisations. Ian with the Department of Health, as much as he's allowed to talk about, because of course a lot is still official secrets. And then about Roger Coward's placement in the Department of Environment in Birmingham Small Heath, which is being published now, the report in England. And John.
Yeah, could you talk about one of your placements, John?
Yeah, with the Scottish Office. It was a really very startling experience for me because I didn't know what was going to be seen. I was invited, before I even found my office there, which I was given a largish office because it was a new building and there was still space not taken up. I went into a meeting which had a large number of people in it, and they were having an annual meeting, and it was to do with what they would be thinking of in the following year. I then went to what was the graphics department and looked at what they had got in there. They were making maps, and in order to make maps they'd got aerial photographs. And those aerial photographs were totally devastating from the point of view of my interests. There was so much, it was an incredibly rich source, and I thought, well, that could take a year anyway to actually make things out of what they got in there. I was then ushered along to do derelict land, and the derelict land is the refuse heaps from the oil and coal industries. These had been the earliest, or the very beginnings of the oil industry. It happened in the last century, and say 100 years of mining shale and getting the oil out from the same pit head or from nearby pit heads and heaping it on the same spot have made immense piles of either red shale, which was in one area of the Lothian region has got red shale on it, and the other is a coal mining area just like any other. And the way that they tipped meant that the process was the same all round, but the net result was all this an individual sculpture, a very classical found sculpture, found process, you see. I got onto this idea that the process of piling up large quantities of the same thing and having to distribute it so that it's economically distributed has great consonances with the natural process. And we are particularly involved with the results of our own inertial processes, so that these things became monuments to our own inertia and determinism for being incapable of getting out of the rut which we've got into. Western man has suddenly got an immense access of technical capability, but can't throw off the terms of reference that he had before, which bred it. And these sites were an opportunity to make that sort of statement. I should say a bit that a bing, which is the Scots way of referring to these heaps, is very similar to a book form. And books were my previous idiom, which I'd given up for quite a long time. I'd not done it. But as soon as I'd seen these bings, immediately that idiom came to mind again, and it was an immense new source of material for thinking. And the last subject that I had to do was the urban renewal. And that, again, the aerial photographs were interesting. The actual picture of the urban situation from 500 miles, for instance, which they had from a satellite, and the implications that it had of what was going on, that these people had got a city in the first place, and what it looked like from another reading, from a different, totally distant view of what you might say we are doing here. Threw up a number of proposals, and that, I think I should leave you with that.
Yeah, do you want to describe one of your placements here?
I've done two placements with APG. The first one was with British Rail in 1973. One specific department of British Rail, the British Transport Film Unit. They were intrigued by the fact that a lot of my artworks, the diaries, some of the performance works, the writings and some drawings had made continual references to train travel with no ulterior motive except that I enjoyed it and found it intriguing. They invited me in as an outsider to look at their activities as producers of promotional films about rail travel. So I spent 3 months in there studying every aspect of their production and administration. At the end of it, I produced with another artist who was working on the same placement a report, a 20,000 word report about their activities and criticisms of their work and a proposal for an alternative attitude. I then went on from that to make a film about rail travel set on a train, for which they provided production assistance, and that film called The Journey is now doing the rounds. The second placement was during 1976 with the Department of Health, the Architects Division of the Mental Health area, and as a result of that I produced three areas of work. I worked with Hugh Davis, another artist working in the Department of Health, on proposals for an audio-visual reminiscence aid for severely demented elderly people between the ages of 80 and 100. And for the rest of the year I worked with the team of architects on a community study of Broadmoor High Security Mental Hospital. And the end result of that was a report which contained literally a study of the community of that place, which was incorporated which was meant as an addition to the proposals for rebuilding that place. We studied how it ran at the moment and made criticisms and suggestions as to how it might change in the future, and incorporated design proposals for that might fit with new ways of operating, and submitted that. Of course, that maybe is not what architects are normally expected to do, and so it wasn't received with open arms, because it went way beyond what was expected. But I, as an artist, operated on exactly the same level as the rest of the team. They began to work less like architects and more like artists, and I carried on working as I normally do, using my powers of observation and ability to commentate and comment and interpret and imagine, and visually and verbally. And the third area was that, which is something I want to do on my own, because I've now done the placement, is that I'm going to make a film about the institutionalization contained within so-called normal life. This is reflected in lots of aspects of my diary, but it's going to be set behind the living room curtains in a street of terrace houses.
There you go, the number one sound there in the downtown countdown. Leo Sayer, When I Need You. Right, out across the airwaves. Wee John Carson from the Art College in Belfast has asked me to help him with his artwork by making a radio link-up this morning across Belfast Lough. John is listening over at the Knocker Monument. Good morning, John. And Leo McCann is listening up at Scarborough Tower. Good morning to you, Leo. And Captain Pugwash is listening in the College of Art in York Street. The idea is to link the three people telepathically by playing a request for them simultaneously at the same time. And this makes an invisible triangle by linking the three places across the airwaves. John's present artwork is concerned with the Belfast Lough area, and he tells me that he feels that the art need not necessarily be confined to the traditional approaches of painting and sculpture, so he's taken his own art activities outdoors. He says that he believes art is to do with increasing our appreciation and awareness of life and our daily living situation and our surroundings. And so hopefully art can keep alive and foster sensitivity and understanding with the community. So hello to John up there at Knocker, and hello to Leo over there at Scarborough Tower, and Pugwash at the College of Art. And here's the particular record I'm going to play for you. It's by Cato Bell, and it's called I Name This Ship Survival.
From February the 26th to April the 23rd, 1977, the work From a Coded World by Stephen Willets took place in Perivale, a suburban residential area in West London. The work, the latest in a series of projects by the artist, involved members of the local community who were asked through a team of project operators to respond to problems concerned with models of social organisation and behaviour. The models moved from authoritative hierarchical structures through various stages to more participatory and cooperative modes, described by the artist as the counter-consciousness present within the culture. The following programme comprises of recordings made periodically throughout the operation of the project and present differing perceptions of the work by the artist, project operators and participants. During the first week of the project, the artist explains the fundamental concerns of the work From a Coded World.
One of the fundamental concerns is to demonstrate that an artwork can operate within the interpersonal fabric of society, within a community, to try to develop a kind of externalised social practice for art that's based on an interactive model of communication. The other objective of the work concerns its actual role and operation within a particular context, and this forwards a model of consciousness which I would identify as the counter-consciousness within our society. This consciousness is built around a cooperative, mutually based type of consciousness, a kind of interactive network. The work forwards, in fact, 4 states of consciousness. It leads its audience through 4 different ways of seeing other persons, 4 different ways of seeing other persons within their own community and by inference society at large. The first of these states is called the authoritative state, the authoritative structures. And this concerns what I consider the predominant consciousness within society. This is the deterministic, unidirected relationship between persons. This is then modified in the succeeding state through consultative structures, associative structures, and finally the cooperative structures. So we have this sort of development through time of where this unidirected vertical structure is gradually collapsed into a sort of net-like layer structure.
How was the work formulated?
If you like, 3 agents constitute the work, which sort of interrelated agents. The first of these, and perhaps the most important, is what I call a symbolic world, which evolves through time and is the context in which the 4 states of consciousness are forwarded. In other words, the work itself forwards as a kind of prescriptive or formula-like type of consciousness. So the symbolic world is used within the work to lead the audience through these different ways of viewing other persons. Now, within the symbolic world, if you like, the symbolic world is inhabited by a group of persons called symbolic group. And this sort of territory and the persons that inhabit it are used within the work to present a sort of parallel world to that of the audiences. And this is very important to the other agents within the work. In other words, a world in which is familiar and similar, but is removed enough to enable the audience to access to free themselves from the sort of latches, the perceptual latches that they have within their everyday world. The second agent are a series of problem situations. If you like, this symbolic group inhabit a symbolic world of problems. And the problems, which are in fact developed in the form of questions, because implicit within the questions the idea of interaction. These problems are the sort of mediating agent between the reality of the audience and that presented within the symbolic world. The problems are used as a way of externalising the implicit representations that the audience have of like structures within their own reality. The third agent is a sort of public register, or a register of responses to these to the problem situations that are encountered by the symbolic group. The symbolic world itself is actually set up as a series of displays. And these displays, there being four, each one being related to one of the states of consciousness, are set up around the neighbourhood in which the work is to operate within. And it's important that the displays are integrated within the kind of neighbourhood environment that the work is to function within, the community context. And in fact have been set up in a variety of locations. These displays are roughly sort of 48 inches wide and are sort of photographic prints on which are shown pictures of the symbolic group in everyday situations. And underneath these pictures are a problem. A problem is given as a sort of question about how you perceive these situations.
Can we talk about the work's duration now? How does it operate throughout its duration, and how long does the work in fact take?
The work is centred on a particular community, and this is this particular context. And this is the context of Perivale, an area of Perivale, which is in fact geographically isolated from other areas by canal, railway, nature reserve, and car dumps and things like that. And within it there are a variety of sort of resources that can be used within the work. Now within this context, the work evolves through a period of 8 weeks. And the community, i.e. the residents and people that work within this area, form the audience of the piece.
Yeah, so the project in fact operates over a period of 8 weeks.
It evolves through 8 weeks. I mean, there's four, basically sort of 3 main stages here. I mean,
could you describe the states?
The first one is where the project is introduced to the community. Now, this is in itself is in sort of 2 parts. The first is a small neighbourhood leaflet that was set up different, around the area in shop windows and the community centre, people's front windows and so on. This was left up for a week to build up some anticipation of the fact that the project was starting. The second week was where a group of people that are helping me as project operators on the piece went around the neighbourhood and in pairs. They were each given a number of streets to look after throughout the duration of the work, so that they can sort of identify with that particular area and get to know people in it, which is very important in terms of people's participation in the work. This is where people introduce the work to the residents through literally knocking on people's doors in the streets and then describing the piece and asking people if they want to participate and so on. So really this is the first part of the work. The second part of the work is where the 4 displays are set up and throughout the neighbourhood, and of course present the 4 states of consciousness that we were describing earlier
and the displays
to the residents.
The displays are changed weekly?
Yeah, the displays are changed weekly. I mean, there are 4 of these, each one's up for a week. At the beginning of the week, people are given the response sheets in which they can record their solutions to the problem situation shown on the problem displays. At the end of the week, the top copy is collected, participant keeping the carbon copy on their file, and the top copy is then taken to the local library, which houses the public register, which is 2 large boards measuring sort of, I think they're 10 foot by 6 or something like this, on which these response sheets are pinned. They're pinned in layers, so they're 4 layers, finally. The last stage of the project is when, having gone through the 4 problem displays, and these are then removed from the neighbourhood, the public register is left up for a further 2 weeks.
During the second week of the work, project operators were in the process of gathering participants by calling on local residents, going from door to door, within their designated project area, which usually consisted of between 3 and 4 streets. The first project operator now describes the initial reaction by householders to the project. The recording was made in Perivale Community Centre, one of the project centres. on a very busy Saturday afternoon. I asked, how long did you spend with each person you contacted?
Varied considerably. I mean, either a couple of minutes, in which case that was it. Other people, I was invited in a couple of times, in which case it took much longer. And didn't always mean that that people were going to take part. They were also, particularly older people, were keen to have someone to talk to in the evening. But I guess about between probably 4 and 5 minutes for those that decided they wanted to do it. So not all that long really. And people seemed to understand. In fact, you could tell from their responses that they'd actually understood the fundamentals of it in a basic kind of way, not in that.
Even though they weren't in any sense connected with the art community.
Well, I think yes, particularly because they weren't connected with the art community, because it seems that it's much more straightforward. In fact, people who don't have an idea of what, or don't have a preconception of what art should be. And the one case who was very dubious of it as art, showed me a painting by his father in the hall and said, which was a kind of row of Tudor houses, and said, "Well, this is what I call art, but I'll do it all the same."
So, what was the predominating sort of reaction once you'd knocked at the door and you went through the process of explaining it, and presumably on that basis?
Slightly reserved kind of interest, basically, for the first time. A couple of people were very enthusiastic, but that was not the general kind of. The general tenor was, well, I'd like to have a go, but I'm not quite sure. And a quite interesting reaction from. I mean, one gets an insight very quickly into the kind of household that is behind the door in a quite extraordinary way.
So was the reaction from house to house very different?
Yes, I think it was. Yes, and even more so in a way when I went back last week to give out. Do you want to go on to that? To give out the first sheets, in that quite often the person I'd spoken to initially wasn't there, and so I spoke to somebody else, and there was amazing kind of husband-wife relationships. Like the husband saying, well, she doesn't want to do it, she can't possibly understand what it's all about, in an amazing, domineering kind of way, and the woman actually being very interested in it, and was obviously rather timid, but actually quite interested in doing something off her own back. One got the most amazing kind of, very quick, well, probably preconceptions really.
Another project operator, again recorded at Perivale Community Centre, describes his experience in introducing the work to residents.
People varied a great deal from house to house, and also from street to street. I was operating on 2 streets, and there was definitely a big distinction between the one street and the other. We got far more participants from one street right next door to another one than we did from the other one. They were parallel. It was sort of the minute someone came to the door, you kind of immediately made assumptions yourself as an operator as to whether you thought they would accept it or not. And more than not, they proved correct, although sometimes, very interestingly, they were completely not correct at all. For instance, at one point we saw someone through a window who we, just judging from sort of the way he looked, the way he was dressed and everything, we didn't think he would accept at all. And when we did actually knock on the door and he answered, he was very very willing to accept, very interested in it, and he sort of responded in a way that, in a completely opposite way from how we imagined. With other people, they'd come to the door and they would stand in such a way that you could tell they weren't interested to start with. They wanted to get back to whatever they were doing. They would usually sort of hold the door slightly ajar, or lean on the door, or lean forward, or they would stand in various ways that you could tell they weren't really interested. And others would simply have, they would open the door completely, lean against the door post and simply listen to you, and would take in the information, and invariably, if they would listen for more than 2 minutes without saying anything, they would invariably accept it. As I say, they varied a great deal. In other cases, people would... I only had one case where someone immediately thought that we were selling something, and the first question she asked us, while I was talking, she stopped me and said, "Look, what are you selling?" And as I explained that we weren't selling anything, and the more I convinced her that it wasn't a question of selling, I think more interested she became, more willing to listen she became. It was sort of perhaps a pleasant surprise to her that someone had come to the door not to sell something to her. As it happened, she herself still didn't accept, though, but her husband did. She said her husband would be interested. As I said, there was a big difference from one street to the other, and we just couldn't see any reason behind it at all. The sorts of houses they lived in were identical. Obviously, in terms of their jobs and class systems and everything, they were identical in that way. The only maybe slight factor could have been that there were more Indian families in the street that accepted people as opposed to the other one, and Indian families tended to be very responsive and willing to accept, be interested in doing it. It would be interesting to study why that was. I have my own ideas.
What was your particular experience while you were explaining in detail the aims of the project and the fact that it was an artwork and the way in which you could operate?
Yeah. I felt that as I was explaining to people, they weren't taking in a great deal of the actual information I was saying, because they would always ask questions afterwards, and the sort of questions they would ask were things I'd already told them, but they hadn't actually taken in specific details of information. What they seemed to do was somehow build up a kind of a general picture of what they thought it was about.
When the project had finished, 2 participants also agreed to record their responses to being involved in the work. I asked about the first problem state.
The first one, well, when I first looked at it, I thought, what's it all about? But once I actually committed myself to paper, it was easier. The first time, it's actually getting up the nerve to commit yourself to paper, if you know what I mean. But once you had answered the first one, then it was better. And once you'd sort of began to understand that they didn't want the same answer, that it wasn't like a survey and there was a right answer, that you just put what you thought, then I got on better, Because I think at first I looked at it and thought, well, what is it they want? And I was looking for the right answer. But then as I realised there wasn't really a right answer, then I did better, then I got on better.
Yes, and there was this final sort of stage of each sort of problem where you were...
Oh, relate it to yourself.
Relating it to your own experience.
Yes, I wasn't so keen on that. I thought I might be revealing too much of myself, to be honest. But, well, I suppose I just put what I thought mostly, really.
Did you in fact compare, your responses to responses of other people?
Only to the pictures. When we was outside, we discussed the pictures, but not the last couple of questions where it said relate to yourself. Then we didn't really talk about that. We just looked at the pictures and said, what do you think? I can't see that man in the laundrette and things like that, But
what about the public register?
Oh, I went down and had a look at that. We had a bit of a laugh, actually, over some of the answers. And we noticed on the one about the management, everybody had disliked the management. I couldn't find a nice answer about the management on that one.
So that there were things that, some of them you were able to sort of feed with your own experiences more than others.
Yeah. Some seemed to relate more to me than others did. Yeah.
What about the second sort of state, where you were examining clubs and colleagues and friends and so on in the second one?
Can't really remember what I did for that one. Let me see. Yes, it's the one, isn't it? Yeah. Oh yes, it's how people got together, wasn't it? Consultative. Well, I found it quite simple, really, to do. Where it said something about the director and how does he show he's in charge and things, I think we all agreed that he sat on a bigger desk and things like this to assert his authority and things. It was quite easy, the second one. I found that much easier than the first one because I'd got going then.
Did you think that the project drew attention to these areas, social involvement and so on, that perhaps
made you think about it?
You hadn't thought about it quite in that way before, or that the thoughts hadn't been kind of structured in the way that the project structures.
No, I didn't really realise how differently I saw things to other people until you go down there and you look at their answers and you think, no, I don't agree with that. You know, then you notice that other people are obviously seeing it differently than you do. I think it showed that up. I think it helped that you didn't have to put your name on it, because then you thought, well, when it goes up there, they're not going to know that's me said that. I definitely think it helped that you didn't have to put your name on it.
And what about the next stage, which was the associative one, the neighbourhood and community?
Well, I thought I ought to know that one more, working in a community centre. I thought, oh, I should be able to answer this one. Yes, it was, I hadn't seen the responses to this because it was over Easter that they went up, wasn't it? People are quite interested in community and social gatherings in the community, I think. You seem to get a good response to that sort of thing, don't you? People get on with their neighbours.
I mean, yeah. And the fourth one, in fact, which was the cooperative.
Yes, now that was the one I found the most difficult. But I honestly think it was really the way it was worded that made it different, and I couldn't see what he was getting at.
Were the parts of it that you found kind of clear and straightforward?
Yes, a couple of the questions were all right. As I say, the one that said what conceptions of the group would result from members involving themselves in each other's problems. I didn't understand what he meant by what conceptions of the group would result. I didn't understand what he meant there. And if he'd been put more plain there, he probably would have got an answer out of me.
Do you feel that you somehow or other got something for being involved?
Yes, I think so. And it makes you, as you say, it makes you think about what's happening. When you stop and think, well, why do I want a community association, and why do I want these things? You know, I think it has made you think about it, which probably you just sail on, don't you? Not taking much notice of what you're doing. And yes, I think it was quite good actually. And got people talking about it.
What, friends and neighbours?
People doing when you're standing by the board, especially in the community centre, looking at it. People come up and say, "Well, what do you think?" You know, mostly about the pictures, as I say, and not as regards the responses to themselves. But I think people got talking about it and said, "Oh no, I don't agree with that."
Seems to have had, quite a local impact in it.
Yeah,
One year.
I think it has. I think people have got more interested as it's gone on.
In contrast, another participant examines his responses to involvement in the project.
Well, at first I didn't really understand what it was about, and I went along to see the display notice boards. The first week I went along to the outside notice board, but I'm afraid as it was a fairly cold March day, I got put off. But from my first ideas of it, it seems that it's asking us how we view other people and how we also view ourselves. Well, that's my first sort of views of it.
And, what made you decide to participate in the project?
Well, I thought at the time I was getting in a bit of a rut at work. And I wanted to see how I viewed other people and how other people might view me and situations.
Where did you, in fact, look at the problem displays? Was it in the streets or in the library or community centre?
In the library. I had time to actually look in them at them in depth. Well, the first problem, problem one, I thought that, I assumed that person A was a student, which I am, I'm a postgraduate student, so I related that to myself and my environment. And it's saying, how can person B help person A in his career? I'm assuming person B is his wife or his fiancée or something like that. Problem two, this is mainly to do with work, as I see it. They're both going out for some sort of sport after work. Problem three, it seems to be a household problem. Problem four is it seems to be bringing home problems from work and overburdening the partner, really.
So, in a sense, it's a kind of, I suppose, symbolic world. Did that make it, easier for you to, detach yourself from it and to, make observations and personal kind of statements about your feelings.
Well, from the pictures, you can derive anything really. It all depends how you view it. I just looked at it as I normally look at things. Actually, looking at the second week's the answers other people gave, I see they actually saw different things in the pictures and in the situations. I found that some of the answers some other people gave were very brief, and they're more like questions. They were saying why this, why that, and they're not actually telling anything about themselves really, and not actually answering actually the problem. I used to go to the library a lot at college, and used to read the books on self-analysis and what a person is. And I think this helped to define it more precisely.
Can we, since we started talking about it, the difference between your response to the problems and other people's responses, what were the kind of main ways in which your responses did differ? I mean, and were there any that really were very different and surprised you?
In the second weeks?
Yeah.
Not in the second week as much as in about the third or fourth week, when they started looking at situations with 3 or 4 people, with a sort of a person who was a leader and such like. I think then they differed. I started to see that some people, it looked as though they were managers or bosses, and other people were sort of servants or people who work for them.
Yes, and moving on to the third relationship.
This I related to my colleagues at work really, especially the problem 5 and problem 6. I go to lots of meetings with my supervisor, and I related problem 6 to a project which I'm working on at the moment. I've got a colleague who's working with me, and we have more or less weekly meetings. So I more or less saw myself and other people in that.
Should we move on to the next one, which is the fourth one, which is to do with cooperative structures?
Yeah, this are related to work as well, really, cooperation, and also to friends, really. I related to cooperation between my friends.
What about the way in which the whole project kind of moved through from very sort of rigid or authoritative structures towards cooperative structures?
The first ones are fairly rigid. I think in the latter ones you could more or less derive what you liked from it or what you could see in it. I tended to relate them to my previous experience. I didn't really see in them anything which I hadn't felt or considered before.
What about the community aspects of the work?
I don't really know how many people went along to the library or the centre to actually look at the responses, but I think it would give an insight into other people's ideas and how other people view oneself, which can't be a bad thing really. Because people tend to get very tied up amongst themselves, and they've got a set idea of how they want their life to run, and other people tend to get in the way sometimes. That does happen, especially at work, I find anyway. Other people have got very rigid ideas, and they don't tend to move them very easily.
Now back in the artist's studio in Paddington, after the project's operation, 2 more project operators described their reactions to aspects of the work, starting by remembering the initial responses to the project by possible participants.
Well, it seemed to vary very, very much between the 2 different streets that one was going to, different doors. Again, generally the sort of younger people were much more interested and sort of wanted the project explained in much more depth. And the older people had a sort of very definite, weren't interested reaction towards it. And it also various things like sort of the Indian families, of which there were a lot in one particular street, seemed to be very interested in the whole idea and wanted it explained to them, whereas the sort of English families tended to sort of, again, not be interested.
What were the comments by participants that were interested in participating, when you'd actually handed them the project file and then went back to collect the first set of responses?
Well, there were a lot of questions, obviously, about the first display boards and the photographs on them. There's quite a lot of discussion at that point that I thought perhaps would take place later, at the very end of the project. More, the sort of conversations would actually build up. But in actual fact, it was really the first time that one went back that the sort of questions really came up, and any discussion in my particular streets took place. Whereas I had expected it to, build up as one went along, as the displays got perhaps a bit more complicated.
So in fact, people's involvement altered over the course of the project?
Oh yes, absolutely. Again, with this discussion with participants, I experienced discussions initially, and then afterwards I sort of didn't really experience any at all, which was, people would again take, most of the people in my area would take the question sheets and just give back the ones that they completed, and that was as far as it went, really. They seemed to sort of treat it fairly straightforwardly, but they were quite curious about what was actually going to happen to each one, and whether, how many people in their area had filled in the sheets, and sort of in their particular street they were interested in the other participants. That was quite interesting.
I think that, yes, I think at times that did become very obvious. I remember a few moments when it was quite sunny, and one was walking down, let's say, one of the Launceston Gardens or somewhere, and various people would be washing their cars, or they'd be out in the front gardens, and they could see you crossing the street, and so by that stage they knew which houses you were going back to, and so they could see, number 17. I mean, that they knew who else was taking part by that stage, and they obviously found it rather fascinating to know that. Though against that, perhaps it was interesting that many of them were not very helpful about putting up a poster in their window. They didn't themselves want to identify to the public, to the other people in the street, that they were taking part. I find it wasn't until actually the last time I went round that I actually did get invited in to someone's house. And in fact, it wasn't in the area I'd originally started in. I was covering someone else's area to collect response sheets, and then got invited, and then had an extremely interesting and positive discussion with one of the participants about his involvement and what he thought about it, and how he got involved and how it had developed.
As the project proceeded, did participants talk more about the public registers and about the problem displays?
Yes, they seemed to sort of quite look forward to seeing that, and sort of kept questioning one about quite where it was going to be and what form it was going to take, and sort of how long it would be before they could see other people's responses. Again, the question about the posters was the same in my streets, although people were interested if Mrs. So-and-so over the road was actually participating. They wouldn't actually go as far as putting up a poster themselves, but they were sort of asked each week how many people were becoming involved in their particular street.
I think people certainly enjoyed, or were very interested, to go down to the library, and once the public register really got going, which I suppose wasn't until the second, third week of people filling in the response sheets. By that stage, I think a significant number of people who were participating had been down to the library and had seen what else other people had written, and it probably must have, in that sense, affected what they wrote themselves. And although they didn't talk about it in great depth at that time, they'd all said, oh yes, went down to the library, went in there. One or two people, in fact, actually filled in there, they took their whole project file down to the library themselves. They went there with it in order to fill it in from the display, from the project display that was at the library as well, so they could both look at the public register and fill in the next week's lot of response sheets. So I think it did sort of turn over like that, or continued between people.
So participants' involvement really did sort of develop then over the duration of the kind of 4-week middle bit, where problem displays were changed on a weekly basis. Did you feel that participants' relationship to you as a project operator changed as the thing proceeded through time. I couldn't help but notice that between the first week and the second week, there was a big leap forward. I mean, by the time that people did the second lot of response sheets, they really did seem to, this was reading them through, did seem to have found a deeper involvement. But after that, it seemed to be quite consistent, that people perhaps found for themselves, or most people found for themselves, a level at which they were going to do it. And this may have been simply that they allocated a certain amount of time. They said, I am going to give this 10 minutes, I am going to give it 15 minutes, I am going to fit it in on Wednesday evening, or whenever it is. And they got already into a routine about it. But that routine must have been changed by the questions.
Could we talk about your sort of attitudes as project operators? What was the difference, say, between your perception of the work prior to its operation and then once it had taken place?
Well, to begin with, I got involved in the project for various reasons, because I was interested in the ideas behind it in theory, and I thought one of the only ways of really understanding it perhaps was to participate, either as a participant in Perivale, which was impossible, or as a project operator, to really experience it, to understand it. So that was the sort of attitude I went into the project with. I also hoped that I would strike up conversations with people.
I think I had probably very similar reasons for starting, i.e. I wanted to try and understand the work, and it seemed like the best way of understanding it by being a project operator. But I think both one's ideas and one's spirits rose and fell a lot through the project. And I can remember feeling after the first night of going round, trying to introduce the work initially to people, door to door, and Steve having said, oh, well, you maybe get 1 out of 2, and like the first 12 doors all said no. And at that moment one felt extremely despondent about the whole thing. But of course by the end of the evening one had actually got 10 people, but one had got as many as one wanted.
What was it like actually, going to Perivale? I mean, what was the environment like? How would you describe it? And being in that situation, being involved in the sort of thing you were involved in, that is knocking on doors and talking to people that were, I suppose, strangers.
You start off very nervous, and certainly with the partner, one was saying, Heather and I were saying between us, I'll do the first one if you do the second one, and we'll take it in turns. You ring the bell and I'll start speaking, or I'll speak the first bit and you speak the second bit. One was finding methods of making oneself do it, because one was nervous.
To begin with, I was extremely nervous, with my partner, especially as the first day we went out. The first 10 people refused, or something like that, in one street. And we felt very despondent, and the weather too, of course, raining all the time. But the next day we went out, and sort of another dozen people, the first sort of every other door was sort of accepting and being very interested. So one's spirits rose again. It was very much like that.
Now the artist evaluates the operation of the project, its implications and effects on the local community in Perivale.
One observation that just comes to mind straight away, and I think that's the most important observation one can make, is the way in which the work was integrated into the community and taken up by the community itself and used by the community. Another observation is, of course, how closely the actual performance of the work really did match the sort of theoretical model of the work, which is very interesting. I think that it seems to sort of adhere to the mapping of the work as a sort of theoretical state. In terms of practical operation, it was also very interesting the way that project operators got very involved in the piece and not only continued, became very dedicated almost to the continuance of the work. Finally, when looking back at the work, one must go back to the involvement of participants, and here we have a number of things that are worth discussing. One is the depth and extensive nature of responses. Now, with earlier works such as the West London piece, which at the time, it should be said, one hadn't had any really other pieces to measure it against, the response we got was from very simple, direct questions that dealt with the physical world. Now, From a Coded World, we have very much more complex and ambiguous types of problem situations that related to a symbolic world, again, which was ambiguous, in the sense of using black and white photographs and models and so on. The idea of the parallel world. Now this seems to have generated very much more complex types of responses than that from West London people. And it does seem to be a factor that the parallel world provided a context in which the participant could release themselves from, the latches that they, or perceptual locks that they had within, in their dealings with the world around them. So it seems that people would be able to become more free in their responses than if they just viewed others around them directly. Again, looking at responses, the other thing that comes up is what I would call the depth of the kind of conceptualizations that are dealt with. In other words, the acts of remodelling. And this again is very interesting. Not only have people written a lot, as it were, physically, and one can see the sort of how they have become involved, but looking at the responses, one can see the kind of prescriptive element within them, which is interesting. Well, also, I think that one thing worth again mentioning is that the work involved a very representative cross-section of the community, that all sorts of people took part in the work. I mean, all sorts of nationalities, all sorts of age groups, all sorts of professions, all sorts of occupations. And this again shows that the work was accepted not just by one part of the community, but by, got into the fabric of life in parallel.
I mean, what were the things, being discussed, because you were a project operator as well, weren't you, by participants as the thing proceeded? What kind of questions were asked? What sort of, issues were raised?
Well, I think at the outset the problem was not only understanding the concepts, the intentions of the work, its functions in terms of the context, i.e. the Paradise context, but the actual procedures, seeing that it worked. I think actually that those two things should be separated. I think that if a person understood the concepts and intentions of the work, they generally would say that they wish to participate, but the continuance of participation was based on how well the model that they constructed of the procedures of the piece matched their actual experience, if you follow what I mean. I mean, they were also, that they, when they went along to a problem display with their file and so on, they felt that, how readily they were able to deal with the problem displays, how well it had been explained to them and so on. And generally speaking, when people had seen the three-element work, i.e. the problem display, they'd made their responses on their file and then been to the library to see the public register and seen all the other responses, and only gaining confidence in terms of the work, the model they built of the work actually operating in reality, but they were able to look at their responses against those of other participants and so on, and this helped people enormously develop their own responses. And again, it seems that people were very much more extensive in terms of conceptualizations they made as the piece developed, and in talking about it, they seem to be able to talk about implications of the work as the work developed, which is kind of interesting. They began to themselves think of how the work could be extended into the community, to the extent that one participant was talking about that when the work had terminated, that perhaps the community should set up their own work, kind of comparable piece. Because they, in this particular case of this woman, she felt that the actual effect on the community was important.